George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Captain, my captain, ImranKhan languishes in a dank C-class dungeon in Fort Attock in Rawalpindi. But it could get even worse. People are saying that his life is now in grave danger. Even his lawyers are being harassed, chased, and disappeared. And one of the relatives of his main lawyer has been murdered. This dark, fascistic shadow that hangs over a British Commonwealth country is actually being directed from Mayfair and the mansions of central London. We'll be talking to a celebrated, yes, celebrated British diplomat, His Excellency, the Honourable Craig Murray, about Britain's role in this perfidious affair. And Cuckoo Cachoo, he is the bagman. Yes, a man I scarcely knew a couple of weeks ago is now locked in a battle with me, which may reach the high courts in the former British colony of Nigeria. We'll be talking to one of Nigeria's finest sons, one of its most educated, erudite, and eloquent spokespeople. So naturally, he's living in exile. About the man who carried the bag with the swag from the heroin trade in Chicago all the way to the president's house in Abuja. You couldn't make it up, but along the way, it appears he stole the election also. Even worse than carrying swag in a bag for the drug dealers in Chicago, Illinois. It's all coming up over the next 2 hours. Make sure you get your calls in early because, well, we expect to be swamped tonight. Last week, 2,166,000 people watched all or part of the mother of all talk shows. It's going to be even bigger this week. Fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Oh, and will Donald Trump fight the next presidential election from inside a jail cell? Well, I mean, if Tinubu can become the president of Nigeria, having had to hand over hundreds of thousands of dollars to the authorities in Chicago in confiscation because, well, it was drug money. The clue was the trail of Colombian white marching powder that trailed from the bag all the way to the bank. Why can't Donald Trump run for president in the United States from inside prison? They've now hit him with more than 77 indictments, which, if convicted on all of them, would see him serve not just the rest of his life in jail, but, well, you get me. It would be the youngest person watching this would still be in jail by the end of that term. We've got a poll running on it. Will Trump fight the 2024 election from a prison cell? It's a simple binary question, yes or no, but people are rather divided on it. 12,267 people have voted so far. Make sure you get your vote in before the end of the show. And will Rishi Sunak be sunk by the dinghies? those that themselves sink and those that land. 100,000 people have illegally crossed into the United Kingdom across the French Channel. Yes, I call it the French Channel because, well, they seem to be ruling the waves there. Despite, however, money the British government has handed over to make them stop, they keep on coming. And the farce of these huge barges on which they were supposed to be housed in lieu of being put up at the taxpayers' expense in Britain forever, perhaps, at the cost of £75 per night per person, 7 days a week. Nice work if you're a hotelier chosen for one of those gigs, despite the barges that were purchased expensively and controversially installed off our shore. Well, none of them are working. First, because the people who came across the channel in a dinghy expressed their fear of living on water. And secondly, you couldn't make this one up. Within 2 days of the use of one of them, an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease suddenly turned the whole thing toxic, and the hoteliers are rubbing their hands in glee. But we'll be concentrating on two main subjects tonight. First of all, my captain, ImranKhan, the distinguished Pakistani cricket captain, one of the greatest all-round cricketers of all time, maybe the greatest, and a man who clawed his way up in the jungle of Pakistani politics and became, well, a much-loved premier. I can say that because all polling indicates that ImranKhan remains even now overwhelmingly the most popular of the Pakistani leaders. But then some of those who may well emerge as Prime Minister after the elections scheduled now for November but likely to be delayed are polling at 3% amongst the public. They were, of course, as we said at the time, and now vindicated, installed in an American regime change operation. And most of them were swept off the front page of the Police Gazette. They were in exile in London, enjoying their ill-gotten gains, facing charges for grand larceny, for the theft from the public purse and the extortion of private corporations in Pakistan of hundreds of millions of dollars, actually more than $1 billion when you count all the indictments up. They were picked up by the Americans and their British satraps and taken to Islamabad and installed in ImranKhan's stead. They will have no credibility, even if they win the elections in November or whenever they are held. No one will give these elections any credibility. An election without ImranKhan is Hamlet without the prince. But these people care not for the collapsing credibility of their so-called democratic credentials. And this is, of course, true throughout the Western world and in the countries that still follow the Western model. They get all high and mighty, you see, about the question of democracy, which is where I came in on the Nigeria-ECOWAS issue. Now, I'm not an expert on Nigeria. I was vaguely aware that Tinubu had been elected as the president of Nigeria and that there was a dispute about it that was going to the courts. I shrugged that off, thinking, well, that is par for that particular course. But when I heard him preaching about the sacredness of democracy and free and fair elections in relation to his neighbor Niger, when I heard him as a saint like Saint Francis of Assisi, talking about the absolute unacceptability of people coming to power in an African country other than, by implication, like him through a pristine election system, I began to look more closely at him. That's when I discovered he was the bagman. Yes, he literally carried a bag of hundreds of thousands of dollars of drug money in Chicago. He should have gone to prison, but instead he just gave the feds the money. Now, okay, that's a common or garden story in Chicago, which in the time of Al Capone and in the time of Joe Biden is a criminal hellhole presided over by Joe Biden's party for the best part of 100 years. It kind of happens. But when I began to think, how does a man who's a bagman for organized crime in Chicago end up in the president's house in Abuja? How does that happen? Well, I then discovered that probably it didn't happen at all. That not only was he a bagman for the mafia, he also stole the election in Nigeria. Now, even then, it was not my intention to get locked into a confrontation with him. I have many fish to fry. I have many conflicts, countries, issues to cover. And then I discovered that not one but two of the main newspapers in Nigeria carried an op-ed in the name of a Mr. Ono, and by golly will he be saying Ono by the time I'm finished with him, which was the most fantastically defamatory, baseless, twisted piece of journalism about me I have ever read, and believe me, I have read plenty. Not only was it littered with absolute falsehoods, it contained a spectacular invention which will cost Mr. Ono very dearly in the courts in Nigeria, if those courts are still operating, as I believe they are. I believe that there continues to be a judicial system in Nigeria. And therefore, I have sought and will instruct this week solicitors in Nigeria against Mr. Ono's defamations and against the newspapers Vanguard and Guardian in Nigeria. Who is Mr. Ono, I hear you ask? Well, he was only the presidential spokesman to the bagman, President Tinubu. Are you with me here? I hope you'll follow me all the way through the legal process that I am about to embark upon. But much more important than trying to steal my name and reputation, this gang around Tinubu have stolen the great African colossus of Nigeria, the most important country on the continent, the most wealthy and developed country on the continent, the most strategically significant country on the continent. And then I began to look at all the other things that Tinubu could have had on his plate to deal with, rather than threatening to invade his little neighbor, Niger. His little neighbor, Niger, had only overthrown a corrupt puppet president who presided over this dichotomy, which is the dichotomy that afflicts most of the continent of Africa. 1 in 3 light bulbs burning in Paris this evening is powered by the uranium dug from the earth in Niger, but 80% of the people in Niger have no electricity. Keep that dichotomy in your mind, because it is that is fueling the anti-Western, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist struggle that is suddenly sprouting everywhere in Africa and in Latin America, and one day also in Asia. They're not going to put up with it anymore. Countries that literally looted them even of their own people as slaves, took over their countries and ran their own national flags up over them, and then, when forced by circumstance or struggle to formally give up their colonies, they insisted on continuing colonization, domination, exploitation of their former colonies. And the people are not prepared to put up with it anymore. And that's all that's happened in Niger. You don't have to like the general that's taken over. You don't have to know anything about Niger, as most of you do not. All you need to know is that the wretched of the earth, as Frantz Fanon called them, are rising up and are taking back that which is theirs and which has been taken from them, withheld from them for so many decades by Europeans and now by extension by North Americans. They're not going to put up with it anymore, and it will be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Some guys you'll like, some guys you won't. But you have to know that the days when France and Britain and the United States could dictate what happens in Africa and elsewhere in the world are well and truly over. I've said to you before, why is it a surprise that most people in the world, the overwhelming majority of people in the world, do not hate those that we in Britain and the United States and Canada and France are told to hate? When will people grasp that it's our leaders, our rulers, that people hate? As Nelson Mandela said when he was released after 27 years in the dungeons of apartheid, and apartheid supported until the last possible minute by France, Britain, and the United States. Don't forget ever that I was there in Parliament when Mrs. Thatcher's lips moved and she described Mandela as nothing but a common terrorist. I saw her say it. I heard the words tumble from her lips. As Nelson Mandela said when he was finally released, your enemies are not our enemies. Many of your enemies are our friends who stood by us when we needed them, who gave us diplomatic support and recognition, who gave us even the weapons of liberation war. Don't ask us to hate people like Russia, like Libya under Gaddafi. These are the people that made our freedom possible, while you were on the other side of the equation. Let me turn quickly and for a couple of minutes only to Pakistan. I've been through this picture before. I struggled against the execution of the late Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. I struggled to have released from prison and then received at Heathrow Airport Mr. Bhutto's daughter, the late Benazir, stick thin, still bleeding from her ears from the brute treatment she suffered in prison after the assassination, judicial assassination of her father. I watched as she was murdered in real time on television. My dear friend, I watched her being murdered on television. I've seen generals come and go, spending out, eking out the rest of their lives in luxury. In Mayfair, it's always Mayfair. I saw Nawaz Sharif, Shahbaz Sharif. I used to meet Shahbaz Sharif in the coffee shops of Edgware Road, where he lived in exile rather well. And now he's the Prime Minister of Pakistan. But Nawaz Sharif remains in Britain. He remains in the Park Lane environs. He remains in Mayfair. But he is dictating everything that happens to ImranKhan. So I'll be asking Ambassador Craig Murray in just a few minutes' time. Talk about not letting go of your former colonies. We give a well-upholstered exile to tyrants, thieves on the run, so that they can put behind bars and maybe take the life of a revered, much-loved, real Prime Minister in Pakistan by the name of ImranKhan. It's all coming up over the next 1 hour and 39 minutes now, so stay tuned. This is the mother of all talk shows. Let me say that you can listen to the audio-only version of MOATS on our MOATS podcast, and the numbers on that are going through the roof. Just search MOATS with George Galloway on Apple, Spotify, Google, or whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. In recent weeks, it's been the #1 political podcast in Benin, Jordan, the Gambia, Qatar, Jamaica, Ghana, Iceland, Malaysia, Singapore, Sweden, and the Philippines. #1 political podcast in all those countries. Truly, truly phenomenal. Do you know that BBC News has lost 40% of its audience in the last 2 years? It's official. And of course, that is the sensible thing to do. But to get people to tune in and change course and listen to a radically different point of view is even more difficult. But it's happening. And the numbers that we are racking up are now in their millions.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Will Trump fight the 2024 election from a prison cell? It's simple, yes or no. You can get your vote in, have your voice heard on my Twitter, on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. So far, it's not that close, but it's closer than most of our polls normally are. But at the moment, most of you think that Trump will not fight the election from a prison cell. If you think differently, then get your vote in over the course of the show. Here are the phone numbers. If you want to comment on what I've said or what I should have said, then this is the number to call. If you're in the UK or Ireland, remember it's free of charge. The number is 08081965522. That's 08081965522. If you're in the US or Canada, and it's equally toll-free, it's +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the rest of the world, which, let's face it, most of you are, it's 44203 966 2625. Now, His Excellency, the Honourable Craig Murray, is always the man to turn to for an informed and educated take on contemporary events. My eye was caught just over the last couple of days when he highlighted the fact that not only is Imran Khan being witch hunted, perhaps and perchance, God forbid, to death, but even his lawyers are being chased and arrested. And one of the relatives of his main lawyer was murdered by assailants working in the interests of the banana regime that has been installed at the top of Pakistan by the United States, closely followed by the UK. Now, Mr. Murray was, of course, a British ambassador of note. So I wanted to ask him just exactly what role Britain might be playing in all of this. And he kindly agreed to appear and talk with me about it. So please welcome His Excellency Craig Murray. Honourable Craig Murray, it's normal for ex-colonial countries to try and keep their hand in, as it were. France is the exemplar in that. But here we have a situation where criminals on the run are actually organizing criminal acts in Pakistan from the rather sumptuous surroundings of London's Mayfair. Why is our Foreign Office, our government, permitting this?
Well, I think if the British government seriously attempted to stop people who had looted wealth from overseas investing that money in the London property market and in London equities and from living here, then it would have a profound effect on the economy of the super wealthy in London because, of course, it includes our ex-colonies, but it's not only our ex-colonies. London is a great repository of looted wealth. Though in the case of ex-colonies, of course, there are historic links that those who are the post-colonial ruling elite installed or approved by the British very often attend British public schools. Of course, members of the military attend Sandhurst. So those links remain very, very real. And we're seeing it actively in Pakistan as we speak, where not only Sharif, but several of his ministerial colleagues moved from comfortable exile in the UK to take over government in Pakistan. But I think we shouldn't be distracted too much by the smoke and mirrors of the social interactions and ex-colonial links of the UK. It's really the United States which is calling the shots. And as always, the UK is a kind of facility being used by the United States, but not much more than that, really.
Now, Imran Khan is in a very dire situation. He's being held in prison, more or less incommunicado. His own lawyers have not been able to talk with him, and even those lawyers now are under severe threat of violence, even death. What can you tell us, or what can you speculate about what they have in mind for Prime Minister Khan?
Well, obviously, they feel they've achieved their immediate objective, which is to keep him out of the forthcoming elections, because he remains, every opinion poll that's been able to be taken of any credibility shows him remaining as the most popular politician in Pakistan, and shows that his party would actually increase its vote at the next election and quite possibly push up toward over the 40% mark and certainly be able to get a majority in the assembly. So they're desperate, of course, to stop him from competing in a democratic election. And they'll feel that they have achieved that with this 5-year ban from politics, which they've imposed. Of course, his lawyers are trying to appeal to the High Court and perhaps eventually to the Supreme Court. And that is one reason why his lawyers are being so harassed. They're not being allowed to meet with or consult with their client. Their offices are being raided. Their homes are being smashed up. They're under extreme personal threat. And in one case, at least, members of their own family have been murdered in suspicious circumstances, in ways that make us think that this may very well be linked to the regime. So the Pakistani government's desperate to keep Imran out of the elections, and of course it should be stated that I think there is no doubt whatsoever that these charges of corruption are ridiculous in the Pakistani context. Imran Khan, there are many things you can say about Imran. There are things you can say against Imran. There are very many good things about the man. But one thing he is not is corrupt. This is a man who has actually given the majority of his personal wealth to found 3 hospitals in Pakistan. He is not somebody who's going to spend his time trying to grab a 3 Rolex watch from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia or something along those lines. These charges relating to gifts, when you compare them to the massive looting of the Pakistani state carried out by the Sharif family over the years, these charges are perfectly ridiculous.
How credible will elections be without Imran Khan and his people on the ballot paper, or do they not care how credible they are?
I think they don't really care, and nor, of course, does the world community. I mean, it is just simply astonishing how little publicity there's been for what has happened in Pakistan, where the democratically elected prime minister has been jailed. And not only that, but literally thousands of his supporters are in jail, thousands of people. And these are mostly middle-class people who in many cases are quite new to politics. And there's almost silence. Yet Pakistan is a country of 250 million people, and a country which has a massive diaspora, and particularly a massive diaspora in the United Kingdom, but also a massive diaspora in other places, like the Gulf states, for example, in Australia, in many countries, in the United States even. It's very hard to understand the complete reaction. And you compare this lack of reaction to what happens when a French puppet is deposed in Niger, which is a far smaller country in terms of population, with far less connections to the West, and yet that has received 10 times the publicity as effectively the coup in Pakistan. It's very, very difficult to understand this, and as I know you have experienced yourself, I've never seen social media suppression like this, and we're getting used to social media suppression. But around events in Pakistan, it is really quite extreme and extraordinary.
I can't understand it either, and both of us have experienced it. We opine on all kinds of things, on Niger and Nigeria, for example. Perhaps I shouldn't mention it in case it comes to pass, but I'm reaching millions of people talking about Niger, and a few hundreds talking about Pakistan. Now, we both remember the time when Imran Khan was never out of the newspapers in Britain, not just as a politician, but as a former playboy, as a wonderful ace cricketer, as a personality, a celebrity. And yet here he is now in prison on trumped-up charges. And not only can you not get anything into the mainstream media about it, if you do a video on it, only a few hundred, tiny number of thousands of people will be allowed to see it. So somebody is telling the social media companies to suppress news about Pakistan. Who could that be? And What would be their reasons, and why are the social media companies complying with it?
It's astonishing, isn't it? The only thing I've seen on this scale was the Hunter Biden laptop story during the American presidential election campaign, where the all social media were told by the FBI directly to downplay or stop circulation of comment on the Hunter Biden laptop, and were, of course, told it was fake, and it was a Russian fake in particular, which turns out it's now admitted to be completely untrue. Everybody now knows that was not a fake, and the Hunter Biden laptop was entirely genuine. But in that case, and of course, the Twitter files were released, and Zuckerberg has confirmed it's also true of Facebook. It was directly the FBI itself directly intervening with the senior management of the social media organizations. And it must be something like that again. It has to be something of that order, which gives you some idea of the priority that the United States had given to getting rid of ImranKhan. And of course, we have to remember why. He not only campaigned against drone operations in Pakistan, he stopped drone operations in Pakistan, and he stopped American military operating out of Pakistan. He moved to get his oil supplies from Russia instead of from the Gulf states, and moved to stop paying for oil in dollars. He refused to back motions at the United Nations supporting the United States position on Ukraine. So, here you have this person who had a very strong international profile, as you say, and a high degree of international credibility, while a person widely appreciated and looked up to in the developing world, who was seen as a threat to the United States. And they've managed to get rid of him, and to do so quietly. And they do look very much like they're hoping he's in terrible conditions at Attock jail. They're quite possibly hoping to actually kill him off in jail. And that requires maximum suppression. That is the only thing that explains the extreme degree of suppression of this story.
When I saw the accusation against him that he had been aggressively neutral, I recalled the basis on which the so-called Labour Foreign Secretary Jack Straw dismissed you from your last ambassadorial post when he said you had overly focused on human rights. It was of that level of absurdity. Who can be aggressively neutral?
Yes, that's really quite extraordinary. I mean, of course, in a way, this is meant to be an example to other leaders that if you don't jump when the United States says jump, when the United States insisted in public that Pakistan vote for a motion condemning Russian action in Ukraine, ImranKhan replied saying, "Are we slaves? Are we slaves?" And the Americans can't stand people turning around to them and saying, "Are we slaves?" Because the truth hurts, and the truth is they do treat the developing world like slaves. They don't accept the developing world has a right to its own opinion, to its own ideas, and to an anti-imperial, anti-colonial background or way of thinking. So I think there are deep lessons here in the treatment of ImranKhan. It's not a kind of one-off episode.
Your Excellency, as always, fascinating. Thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. The Honourable Craig Murray, former British ambassador on ImranKhan and Pakistan, colonialism, imperialism, Britain and the United States. I'm sure that you will want to have your say on these matters. If you're in the UK or Ireland, it's 0801965522. If you're in the US or Canada, It's +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the rest of the world, it's 44 203 966 2625. At the other end of the hour, we'll be talking Nigeria, and it will be your calls right up until the hour after this very short break. Stay tuned. Let's hear from Mehdi. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, George. Thank you very much for taking my call. This is such an honor because one thing I want to tell you is in 2003, I thought that you, I'll say it, I thought you were a prattling liberal idiot. 20 years later, I'm here honored to speak to you, to say live on air, I'm sorry, I should have listened to you back then. You're bringing the truth to what's going on out there. And one of the things is U.S. policy, whatever it is now, is our government. The problem is that it's run by people with absolutely no honor. They have no shame in what they will do to accomplish what they want. And I really think part of what's going on, that's driving what's going on in Ukraine, is that it's the possibility of all the corruption that it will uncover that has happened there with the influence of our country and NATO since 2014.
Yeah, you spoke extremely powerfully and very graciously, and I'm grateful for it. But you put your finger on, I think, something that's been in the back of my mind for a while. I grew up in a time, indeed I sat in Parliament for almost 30 years, during a time when there were certain standards. There were double standards, of course, and there was a great deal of hypocrisy, but the ruling elite had standards that they tried to keep up. Nowadays, that facade has been torn asunder. Now they're not even pretending to be honorable gentlemen and ladies. Now they're no longer pretending that their institutions, their great departments and ministries are in anything to do with contemporary politics other than an arm of the ruling party. My last word, Mehdi. I ain't no liberal, bruv. I wasn't back in 2003, and I ain't any more liberal today.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, our podcast just reached #2 in Nigeria. Here's a prediction. It'll be #1 after tonight's show. Kevwe Abenabi says, hey, Nigerians, let's beat the algorithm. Like and share. You know what we do best. Let's make this episode go viral for George. Thank you very much for that. Rudy's on the line from Montreal on Trudeau. Let's hear from him. Rudy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, George. The caller who complained about Trudeau reminded me of the young girl who complained about Iraq and the baby situation, throwing the babies on the floor. The fact of the matter is, what happened during this caravan? They're actually, I believe, attempting to overthrow the government of Canada. The fact is that these truckers were armed to the teeth with guns, ammunition, and they wanted to allow or have the Conservative Party, whose leader was an American and probably a CIA asset, to run Canada. And this is unacceptable. The fact is that police gave the truckers fair warning to get out of the place where they were and to go back elsewhere. And they didn't take it. that this is their fault. Now, the fact of the matter is the Trudeau government has been one of the best governments people have had in Canada. You laugh. The fact
You're having a laugh. You're having a laugh. Rudy, you're having a laugh. Look, you're entitled to your point of view and more than welcome to express it here on the show. And I'm entitled to say, I never heard such bollocks in all my life. Trudeau, the best government that Canada has ever had. I don't know how you could possibly reach that conclusion. The truckers were not armed to the teeth. If they had been armed to the teeth, they would have been arrested for being armed to the teeth. But they were not arrested for being armed to the teeth. None of them had weapons to which they were not entitled. It was you and people like you who called them fascists because they were seeking to demonstrate their point of view in the way that you have just demonstrated yours. This is the problem with Canada. It wears pretty pink Barbie clothes, pretending to be oh so achingly liberal. But in fact, it is an utterly repressive, repugnant regime that Trudeau runs, supporting every war, supporting every tyranny, including increasingly a tyranny against its own people and their rights of freedom of speech. You can strut around in Barbie garb as long as you like. You can pose with your transgender buddies on the streets of one pride after another, month after month after month. But that don't make you progressive. These words are vapid. They are empty. And Trudeau is but the lipstick on the ugly face of Canada. Well, I believe I'm right. And we'll see what other people from Canada might think in the course of this show and future shows. But Rudy, thank you very much for calling. Sarkar is in Glasgow on Niger. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Good evening, George. George, it's a very worrying question, and also the reason I'm calling, by the way, it's a great show, by the way, keep up the good work. It's a very worrying question I have. The French are lusting to gain allies to start a war in Niger. The French are still living in some colonial past. They believe the Africans who are slowly opening their eyes...
Beau geste, yeah.
Absolutely. They believe the Africans whose resources they've exploited. I mean, many of the African countries don't have proper water, electricity, but the French have used their resources to empower and enrich themselves at the cost of those people over there. Now, the French are angry because one of their puppet governments, which was not liked by the people, has been removed. The French are angry. Now this guy, Macron, he's trying to be the big dude in his classroom. He wants to gather allies to go for a war in Niger. He doesn't realize that his country had the yellow vest protests for 2 years. His country shot an unarmed 14, 15-year-old boy just a few weeks ago, and we saw the riots which happened over there. This obsession with always going and controlling others has been a common factor with not just the NATO, but also the EU players. What is this obsession of not being able to manage your own countries, but going and managing other countries? Is this some kind of a magic pill or potion they are on? And what will be the outcome? I don't know, George. I don't know. Have they learned nothing from saber-rattling?
I think I know. I think I know. And thanks for your call and your kind words. These people are even going to Africa and trying to dictate to African governments and people what they should think on issues of gender and sexual orientation and so on. They were at the World Bank just cut off the government of Uganda because it passed a law which, as far as I can see, is no different to the law against which I struggled, introduced by Margaret Thatcher in Britain in the 1980s, in the late 1980s, early 90s. I have a point of view on that. But my point of view has nothing to do with Uganda. I can't tell Ugandans what attitude they must have. to these issues of gender and sexuality and so on. And I thought that the best answer came from Ibrahim Traore, the leader of Burkina Faso, who said, for 62 years, France has been giving us development aid. 62 years later, we're still not developed. And so when they withdraw their development aid, as they now have in protest at the alliance which Burkina Faso has made with its neighbor, Niger, well, I don't know what you can say about that. First of all, your development aid didn't do much bloody good. And secondly, if it comes with these kind of strings, we've got to kill our neighbor or you'll cut off our development aid, or in the case of Uganda, we've got to have the same attitude to the 97 genders and the endless strutting of pride of one sort or another, or you won't give us World Bank assistance. Well, why don't you put it where the sun don't shine? What I think is that the Niger story is the perfect microcosm for this dichotomy I invited you all to keep in your minds at the beginning of the show. 1 in 3 light bulbs in France, powered by Niger. 80% of the people of Niger, no electricity at all. This cannot continue. And anyone who thought that the people would allow it to continue forever was living in cloud cuckoo land. Peter is in Ireland on Niger. Go ahead, Peter.
Yes, thank you very much, George. Here once again.
Welcome.
First, I want to thank you to say that please, I could to use your platform to call on the British establishment to intervene in the affairs, in the incarceration of Nnamdi Kanu. He's a British citizen. His family is there in the UK. He's there languishing away. I still call on your platform to ask the British establishment to intervene.
This is the Biafran man. Is this the Biafran man you talked about before?
Biafran man, yes. Nnamdi Kanu. He's British. Yes. He's still there, languishing.
Yeah, you made that point powerfully on the last show. Please make a new point, if you will.
My contribution, George, is in respect of the subtle intervention. Why the French have direct intervention in the internal affairs of Niger Republic. The British establishment has a subtle intervention in the affairs of Nigeria. Human rights violations are going on in Nigeria. I'm asking one question. Why is the British Commonwealth in existence? The so-called Commonwealth. Commonwealth of who? That is a subtle neo-colonial establishment.
Well, a very good question.
In London.
Yeah, a very good question. Commonwealth of who? We'll leave that one hanging in the air, Peter, and it will no doubt come up in the second hour. O'Daniels Okonkwor Aniesi says, thank you, George Galloway, for lending voice to the African struggle. It is clear that Africa has never been independent. We only have locally staffed colonial authorities. The inhumanity has to end. And John F. Young says, Nigerians never voted for Bola Tinubu. He imposed himself on the people. We'll be talking in the second hour about that. John sends an email. It's on air at MOATS.tv. Talking about democracy, we're not in the best position to tell anyone about it. Sunak wasn't exactly democratically elected, was he? Our government has turned against its citizens and are surplus to requirements, in my opinion. Keep up the truth-telling. You're going great guns. Thank you for that, John. On the line from Florida is the legend, Simon in Florida. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Simon.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. Just some brief updates. There's been some startling developments in the last few hours, both in Pakistan and in the conflict zone potentially of Niger and Nigeria. Quite extraordinarily, in Pakistan, you will no doubt recall, tomorrow is their Independence Day, the 14th of August. And as we speak, notices are being issued in accordance with Section 144, the infamous equivalent of their Riot Act, that is basically cancelling all of the Independence Day celebrations effective today through the 19th of July, but in particular for all the major cities across Pakistan.
Wow. Well, I suppose their independence has actually been cancelled, so you might as well cancel Independence Day. What do you say, Simon?
True, and sadly,
have we lost
ironic.
Simon? Yeah.
No, I'm still here.
Yeah, go ahead, Simon.
Clearly.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think that's a true and very ironic observation. Now, the other thing that's occurred is in the last few hours, we've had this national address from the current Prime Minister, who you've been referring to, along with his brother, now that they both seem to be moving on from their previous happy holidays in London. And he's in the process of handing over to the very largely unknown caretaker Prime Minister, who will now be in charge of the technocratic government of Pakistan for the next 3 or 6 months, however long the Election Commission of Pakistan decide to take in order to redistrict all of the parliamentary boundaries. But meanwhile, in Nigeria, the meeting of the ECOWAS defense chiefs that was due to happen yesterday in the city of Accra, actually in Ghana, that was cancelled. And whilst you're having your run-in, which I appreciate, with certain members of the Nigerian press, generally across the board, there seems to be universal agreement that a military intervention is a very, very bad thing, including a statement from the Nigerian equivalent of the British Trade Union Congress, their NLC. And what's the most astonishing thing of all of these occurrences is, despite its extremely politically incorrect image, just this weekend, HMS Trent of one of their small riverine gunboats that can be loaded with 40 troops and an assortment of drones is now heading on its way down to the Gulf of Guinea, supposedly to operate in anti-piracy operations.
Aha. Very interesting, as always, from Simon in Florida, bringing us up to date with the very latest from both Pakistan, which has cancelled its Independence Day, some may say rather appropriately, and the gunboats on the move in Nigeria. Of course, we are all against piracy. We're all against terrorism. One of the complaints of all the governments of sub-Saharan Africa is the proliferation of Islamist fanatic terrorism caused by the British, French, and American overthrow of the government of Libya, using as their weapon the proliferating alphabet soup of Islamist extremism. What did you expect when you put the Libyan Islamic fighting group in power in Tripoli? I mean, the clue was in the name. And did you think that they could be contained within the borders of Libya and that they would not seek to continue their jihad into the neighboring countries? And did you think that those neighboring countries were all robust enough, their societies cohesive enough, their militaries powerful enough to fight off the incursions of these Islamist fanatics. Because if you thought that, you are an idiot and don't deserve to be in control of countries as powerful and deadly as France, Britain, and the United States. 40% of Burkina Faso, 40, is in the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the head-chopping, throat-cutting Islamist fanatics. Where did those fanatics come from? They came from Libya. Obama said that Libya was his biggest mistake. It's a mistake that the people of Africa are continuing to pay for bloodily until this day. Now, David Hundeyin, a journalist, an award-winning investigative reporter, Cambridge educated, a paragon of eloquence, will be up right after this short break talking about all things Nigerian, West African, and dealing, of course, with the possible war in the neighbor of little Niger. Stay tuned. I promise you, it's going to be the mother of all talk shows.
Many people today struggle with the common mainstream media consumer. These types of people are mindless zombies. Instead of living authentically, they feed off masking their true thoughts and feelings, doing nothing and criticizing those who actually do their research. These type of media consumer can be highly manipulative, so here are some golden standard clapbacks when they start with their propaganda. When they say you are too much for them, show them a mirror and tell them to look for less. Draw a diagram of where your business is and their business is, to visually show them they are in the wrong area. When they say, please watch this clip from this reputable BBC journalist, remind them that there are no longer any reputable BBC journalists, and to instead watch the mother of all talk shows for some real journalism. The next time you encounter a brainwashed zombie, hold your head high and know their obsession to eat your brain is masking their jealousy of your confidence, your freedom in self-expression, and most importantly, your authenticity. Keep listening to learn more on the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
David Hundeyin is an award-winning investigative journalist and the founder of West Africa Weekly, and he joins us now. David, thank you for joining us. One of the more anticipated interviews of the mother of all talk shows. Thank you for agreeing to talk with us. We wanted to get your in-depth analysis of the situation in Nigeria. But first, can you clear something up? Was I unfair on Tinubu when I described him as a bag man?
I actually think you didn't go far enough. So as you may know, I'm the journalist who is basically responsible for putting this story out into the public domain. More recently, there was a story that I published last year on this issue, which became the basis for all of this. And in that story, the headline of the story is actually "From Drug Lord to Presidential Candidates." I described him as a drug lord. I think that's a fair description based on the evidence that is available. So calling him a bagman is actually a bit tame, because it implies that there is still some sort of separation between him and the drug trader. Okay, he wasn't actually directly involved in handling heroin, he just handled the money. But actually, that's not what the evidence says at all. If you actually read through the court papers, it becomes very clear that this person was intimately involved in the heroin trade in Chicago. For whatever reason, the U.S. authorities have chosen to sit on their hands. And I guess we'll come to that later in the show anyway.
Yes. So how does such a man even if he was just a bagman, but worse if he was more. How does such a man end up as the president of a mighty country like Nigeria?
Short answer, he doesn't, or he's not supposed to. But I guess we live in very unusual times. We live in a time when it's become increasingly clear that certain countries, i.e. the US, are becoming more and more brazen about their willingness to basically set everyone else on fire to keep themselves warm. So in this case, it is increasingly evident. If you've read my story, if you watched my documentary, if you read the reporting by Kit Klarenberg of Grey Zone News, if you read the court documents, if you've done your research, it becomes very clear that this person, who is supposedly sitting in Aso Rock as the president of Nigeria, isn't actually working for Nigeria. We essentially have a U.S. intelligence asset occupying the office of Nigeria's president, and the U.S. authorities are well aware of his history, of his past. I personally am involved in at least 2 legal processes as we speak, trying to force the U.S. authorities to make the contents of his FBI file public, because there is an FBI file on him, and we get tossed around a lot. Due to privacy concerns, we're not going to let you have this information. And it's like, well, this is the president of a sovereign country. So I think we're well past the point of, invoking privacy concerns now, because the foreign policy decisions or the local policy decisions made by this guy potentially affect the lives of 200 million people, even more, as we're seeing now in the case of the war with Niger, which is determined to have potentially an entire quarter of Africa could be going up in flames, because we essentially have a president whom, first of all, was never qualified to run for that office, should never have been on that ballot, legally speaking. And most importantly, we did not vote for him. He did not win the election. And based on the data that the US government itself paid for, the polls that the US government itself, the pre-election polling and research the US government itself paid for, based on the reports that were put out by the EU Observer Commission, it's evidence, it's visible to the blind and audible to the deaf, that not only did this guy not win the election, he wasn't even close. And yet, some of these powerful countries, shall we say, have simply decided that, look, we have foreign policy objectives, we have foreign policy goals, and one of these goals is, for whatever reason, to keep our thumb on West Africa. And the way to keep our thumb on West Africa is to ensure that whoever is in power in Nigeria is someone who is completely supine, completely pliable, someone who essentially can be blackmailed, because that's my reading of the situation. So essentially right now, Nigeria is sovereign in name, but we are essentially under some sort of foreign occupation. That's the way I see it, because the person who is wielding the powers of state as president is not working in the interests of the country. He's not working for us. We didn't put him there. We didn't vote for him. And he's not answering to us. He's answering to Paris. He's answering to DC, London to a lesser extent. He's answering to everyone except us, the 200 million people of Nigeria. So where does that leave us? I mean, who knows?
Well, is there extant a legal system in Nigeria that is at least uncompromised to the extent that they will do their duty and reverse what is clearly a kangaroo hijacking of the presidency of a great country? I mean, the ballot rigging and all the rest, all of this is in court. The man, Mr. Obi, who came second, he's pursuing it. Is there any chance of judicial resolution of this matter, or are the people going to have to take to the streets?
So I don't believe that the Nigerian judiciary actually has it in them, and the reason I say I don't believe it is it's much more than just a case of ballot rigging, right? This won't be the first Nigerian election to be rigged. The issue here is, over and above that, there is a surplus of evidence that makes it very clear that this person should never even have been on the ballot. This is someone whose university degree certificates submitted to the Electoral Commission are obvious forgery. It's an obvious forgery. I did a story on this in November. It's such an obvious forgery. You can actually trace where it came from. It came from a cheap online forgery service called diplomamakers.com. Right? This degree certificate has grammatical errors on it. Right? We took the extraordinary step of actually submitting a subpoena to the supposed university he went to, Chicago State University, for the records of this person known as Bola Tinubu. And the results that came back were at total variance with the things that he submitted to INEC. He submitted a bunch of forgeries, right? So there's controversy over even the basic identity of this person, right? We have an actual criminal here. And this isn't something which just came to light recently. This is something which, as far back as last year, when I did a story on this actually went to court. We actually took this to the Federal High Court in Abuja, that this is a national security problem here. We essentially have someone who we don't even know who this person is, right? All we know about this person is this person used to be a drug dealer. Somehow or the other bought his way into the Nigerian political mainstream. And somehow this person is about to contest an election on the platform of the ruling party. And here is evidence suggesting that this person has committed all kinds of fraud. He's committed identity theft. He has submitted forgeries. He has committed multiple perjuries. And what happened was not a single judge agreed to take on the case. So the case is pretty much just timed out. It just sat at the court. It wasn't assigned to a judge. All the judges ran away. Nobody wanted to touch it. So he ended up running during the election, which he still lost anyway. And then somehow at 4 a.m. when everyone was asleep, he was declared winner. So now it's so I don't believe that the Nigerian judiciary has
many of our American audience will be familiar with that phenomenon. Indeed, I'm familiar with it myself in English elections in which I had an interest. The 4 a.m. Delivery of just enough ballots to win is one issue. But as you say, that has happened many times in Nigerian politics. I suppose the big question is why the ruling party was reduced to picking him as their nominee. Couldn't they come up with somebody better than him? A drug dealer from Chicago?
Well, I guess they were constrained because the political deal, if you like, the political transaction, which brought the former President Buhari, to power, was essentially a temporary merger of two remarkably different political formations. So if you can think of it in terms of, say, 2010 in the UK, because I was in the UK at the time. So the deal that put the Conservative Party in power, where there was the Conservative power, and then there was the, I think it was the Independent Party. What was it called?
The Liberal Democrats.
Yeah, exactly. And no one expected that there would ever be any sort of, merger between the two. But there was a partnership, Nick Clegg and David Cameron, and, the rest is history. Something similar happened in 2013, in 2013, actually, where the party now known as the APC was sort of cobbled together, a loose coalition. So it was the CPC, which was like a northern, a northern interest party, and then there was the so-called ACN, the Action Congress, which was a more southwestern party. These two historically are chalk and cheese. But for the purpose of seizing power from the then ruling PDP, they sort of cobbled together a coalition. And I guess the deal was, okay, that's Buhari from the CPC, you get to rule for 8 years, right? And then after you, it's going to be my turn, since I'm the one making this possible. I'm the one putting up the money, because he has endless amounts of money. Obviously, we have an idea of where that money comes from. I'm putting up the money. I'm making all of this possible. I have the international connections, because he's deeply connected with, for whatever reason, with the democratic establishment in the US. As if you read my story, I'm sure he's deeply connected with Hillary Clinton via his good friend Gilbert Shaguri. So he has all these international connections. In fact, the campaign manager that ran Buhari's campaign in 2015 was none other than David Axelrod, the David Axelrod, the same guy who ran Obama's campaign. So he has all these international connections. He has all this money. So he essentially made Buhari the president on the assumption that after 8 years it's going to be his turn. And that's exactly what happened. So essentially, the entire country of Nigeria, all 200 million human beings, was essentially the subject of a trade between this guy and a political formation in the north. That, okay, if you give me this thing, if you come into a coalition with me, I'm going to let you have 8 years, and after that, I get to be president. In fact, it's no coincidence that his campaign tagline, and this was literal, this is unironical, you can confirm this from any Nigerian you speak to, his campaign tagline was Emilo Khan, which, if you translate that to English, it literally means it's my turn. That was his campaign tagline. And, that was very unironic. He actually meant that it's his turn. So his entire thing was, well, I gave you people the presidency for 8 years. Now it's your turn to reward me for giving you this thing. So it's my turn, essentially. So that's unfortunately, that's the level of Nigerian politics. There's no ideology. It's just horse trading, and that's it.
Well, that might have succeeded if this new Niger crisis had not erupted, because, quite frankly, if he confines his criminality to robbing the people of Nigeria, that's just a matter for the people of Nigeria. But if he's about to plunge the whole of West Africa into the quagmire, into a forest fire that will burn, that becomes an international matter of some importance. Now, why has he chosen to be the spearhead of the obvious French and US attempt to intervene in Niger, even if it means all-out war with Niger, Burkina Faso, with Mali, and who knows where else? And will the Nigerians put up with that?
So, two reasons. First of all, internal reasons. Under the Nigerian constitution, if the country is in a state of war, then the president or the head of state essentially becomes a king. Essentially, it becomes impossible to remove the head of state. So there's as you mentioned, there's a legal process in courts. Even though I don't really have faith in the Nigerian judiciary to do the obvious thing, which is to disqualify him, because he clearly should never have been on the ballot. This person is a criminal, but there is still a chance that something could happen there. So this could be a method of sort of ensuring that that base is covered, that, regardless of whatever decision is arrived at by the courts, that just by virtue of being in a state of war, he becomes essentially unremovable, which is permitted by the Nigerian constitution. The second thing is, it's clear to anyone who has a functioning pair of eyes that the French and the Americans are, for lack of a better term, blackmailing him. Because clearly, he's not really in control here. If you followed the situation from day one, it's been clear that the decisions that he has made are not the decisions of someone who has actually thought this through. These are the decisions of a puppet who has someone's mouth in his ear, someone's hand up his arse. Pardon my French. So, for example, 2 weeks ago, when this crisis initially erupted, under Nigerian law, a president is not permitted to deploy the Nigerian military outside of Nigeria without approval from the Senate, from the parliament. It's not permitted. But he tried to circumvent that. He illegally deployed Nigerian special forces into Niger. And certain people within the Nigerian military actually were not on board with this at all. And they took an unprecedented step, right? They actually leaked a top secret document from the defense headquarters to me. right? Bear in mind that I'm viewed very much as a journalist who is almost like an enemy of state in Nigeria. So for the Nigerian military to actually leak such a document to me, I think that tells you everything you need to know about, how this war is viewed even within the ranks of the Nigerian military. So after this document was leaked and I put it out, I was accused of, treason, you're betraying soldiers' locations, you should be picked up, blah, 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 blah. But it achieved, that leak achieved its goal. It actually stopped that illegal invasion. And then he went to the Senate to ask for approval. The Senate turned him down. So now the tactic that has been adopted is to go hide behind ECOWAS and claim that, well, ECOWAS has approved the deployment of this thing called a standby force, right? First of all, who is ECOWAS? ECOWAS is Nigeria, right? So it's like saying, I don't know, if you're talking about the UK, right, and say there's something relating to football in the UK, and you say, the British team. No, there's England, which is by far the dominant force, and then there's Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, but England is the dominant force. It's a similar thing within ECOWAS. There is no such thing as ECOWAS in the real sense of it. There is Nigeria. Every single time that there has been a military intervention by ECOWAS, it's essentially been the Nigerian military being deployed. So that's like the latest attempt to sort of end run the refusal by the Nigerian parliament to grant him his war, because he obviously desperately wants this war. And the sheer amount of desperation that is being displayed here makes it clear to me that this isn't something that came out of his own head, right? And the noises coming out of Paris and Washington, D.C. just make this all the more obvious. You essentially have President Macron almost issuing edicts. For many years, the French have sort of tried to mask their openly colonial positioning within West Africa. I remember sometime in 2020, I personally even wrote an article in the Africa Report, where I essentially pushed back on the idea that the French have direct colonial control of Africa. I critiqued the idea, right? Because, based on the understanding that I have there, look, the France of Charles de Gaulle and the France of today are, remarkably different countries, and it no longer sort of captures the French public imagination to have Africa under its thumb or anything. So for many years, that's the image that France has tried to curate in Africa. But this time around, it's shed all pretense. It's, as I said, visible to the blind and audible to the deaf. It's almost like, Macron screaming at Nigeria that, hey, go get me back my territory, and it's like, hey, Niger is a sovereign independent country, isn't it? Or it's supposed to be a sovereign independent country, isn't it? Why is there this much, angst? Because they essentially said, go home, we don't want you anymore. So it's clear that there are outside forces that are not just involved here, but that are actually in control, actually in the driving seat, which puts us Nigerians in a uniquely dangerous situation, because, as you correctly stated, such a war wouldn't just be a problem within, Niger and Nigeria. The entire West African sub-region is going to go up in flames. You've mentioned that the Malians, the Burkinabes, the Guineans have already, signaled their support for Niger. Algeria has already sent a signal that it's going to stand with Niger as well. So potentially, you could end up having an entire belt of chaos across the Sahel. Right? Sudan is currently in chaos. Ethiopia and Eritrea are currently having issues. And as they're coming west, you're seeing that potential for an entire band of chaos. And the Russians are somewhere in amidst all of this, allegedly, and they also have an interest in this somewhere too. So ultimately, regardless of what happens or does not happen to the US and French interests in the region, we are the ones who are going to suffer the consequences. And this is why I've taken such personal interest in this issue. This isn't just some airy-fairy political discourse, right? This is something that's going to have real on-the-ground consequences. The Nigerian border with Niger is over 1,000 kilometers long. It's the longest single land border that Nigeria has. The distinction between Nigerians and Nigerians is almost impossible to make, because again, that border was drawn on Wilhelmstrasse in Berlin, right? It's not a border that actually makes any sense. It's just a line in the sand that was drawn at the Berlin Conference. It's the same people on both sides of the border. And for the most part, it's not even a demarcated border. So if you're going to go to war with a country that you cannot functionally demarcate yourself from, how does that even work in the first place? So ultimately, it's going to devolve into some form of ethnic genocide. But that's almost nailed on, guaranteed to happen. And once that starts to happen, the last remaining band of stability in West Africa is going to go. And then you're going to have essentially the entire top half of Africa, going from Libya all the way down to the Central African Republic. The entire top half of Africa is going to be one contiguous band of absolute mayhem, right? And that's close to 400 million people whose lives are going to be thrown into utter chaos. And why? Because the US has a drone base in Agadez, or France wants to keep on mining uranium in Niger. Is that worth 2 or 3, 400 million lives? I don't think it is, which is why we're having conversations like this, because clearly we're not at the point where the independence or the sovereignty that we probably thought we had, it's clear that we don't have. So maybe, I don't know, we're living through the 1960s all over again. So maybe there needs to be another Pan-African liberation movement. I don't know. But clearly that's the situation we found ourselves in now. We're literally being ruled by a vassal, by an illegitimate vassal who does not answer to us.
A vassal who's a bagman, and maybe even worse than that. This is peerless analysis. For those who are not already following you, and a very large number of people are, what's the best way to keep up to date with your thinking, your reportage on this matter?
Right. So my platform is called West Africa Weekly. So that's westafricaweekly.substack.com. I also have a documentary channel on YouTube. It's called West Africa Weekly. And then you can find me on social media. It's my name, David Hundeyin. It's just there. So that's pretty much easy to find.
Fantastic. I hope we speak again. Thank you, David, for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Will Trump fight the 2024 elections from a prison cell? 16,000 people have voted, and 62% on Telegram, 57% on Twitter, 67% on the community poll, and 65% on the YouTube stream think that the answer is no. You've still got time to vote. Lots of comments on David's interview on YouTube. Call the show now if you want to have your say. If you're in the UK or Ireland, 0808 196 5522. If you're in the US or Canada, +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. Calls all the way to the end after this short break. As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out, pallid green, and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire. Email from Raimundo. G, what is your gut feeling about Niger? How are France and the US going to react? meaning France kicked out of former colony, and the US with a 100 million base drone on danger to be closed. So sad, too bad, never mind if these two things happen. Let's go to the lines. Nico is in Los Angeles. Let's hear from him. Nico, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Thank you, George. Thank you for having me. I'd love to follow your latest guest there, David. What a tremendous insight and intelligent man there who has an idea of what's going on there in Niger and in Africa in general. And that's what I'd like to talk about, what's going on there as it relates to the protocols of the elders. When you look at the sinister plans that have been planned behind everybody's back in secrecy, the 1,000-year Reich, all of that is in place of supremacy and dominance of the global resources. So when you see conflicts, you're going to understand the protocols are in place. Conflicts are part of the protocols for global dominance, global resource dominance. Wherever there's resources, there will be conflict.
Protocols are you talking about, Nico?
The protocols of the elders of Zion. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
This is stop now, and get off the show, Nazi. Felix is in California. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Felix.
Yeah, George. Good evening to your listeners and good evening to everybody in Africa.
Welcome. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, what I wanted to say that do we have ECOWAS in Africa? Because the reason why I ask this question is all the ECOWAS leaders are hypocrites. You understand? You guys are sitting there.
Yeah, I mean, not many of them have got a terrific record on democracy, do they?
No, because I don't get it. See what is going on in Niger. And you guys sitting down supporting your fellow African to let somebody invade them. It doesn't make sense. And end of the day, who is going to lose? It's we, the neighboring country, we Africans are going to lose. Nigeria, Burkina, Ghana, Mali, whatever, we're going to lose. You understand? So if somebody is sitting down supporting them, this Western, without Africans, you are nothing. You understand? Now we said no more France. No more France. They should go home. They should go home and leave the rest for us. You understand?
I do, and lots of people on the streets of African countries are saying that. Of course, it's not only France, but in West Africa, it is predominantly France. But who put the bagman in power in Abuja? Seems to me that David is on the right track, that this is effectively a hijacking of the most important. 1 in 5 of all Africans is a Nigerian. This is a seriously important player in the continent and indeed in the world. It wasn't France that put the bagman in power. It was the United States, Felix. We've lost them. Patreon comments. Now, of course, I need your support on Patreon, and I'm very grateful indeed for those who are supporting me. I was writing to a few of them earlier today. Stefan Papic says, "Thank you, Maestro, for all you've done and keep on doing. A true light in these times." Thank you, Stefan. And James Lenahan says, "I like the idea of Trump going to jail. He could be a teacher like Chris Hedges and teach the inmates real estate ethics." An oxymoron, surely. Then when they get out, they could rehabilitate themselves by leasing Manhattan commercial real estate. And Paul McDonald says, if Trump spends 1 day in jail for boxes no one is allowed to see or know what was in, then the gloves are off in America. Civil war. Great show as always. Thank you, Paul. And Charlotte Burns says, Trump is stubborn enough and crazy enough to see this through. It's one of the few things I admire about him. Well, I saw his latest rally and the crowds there chanting 4 more years. He looks like a nailed-on winner to me, but then he did last time also. So search me on Patreon, please, patreon.com/George Galloway. Emeka is in Maryland on Niger. Emeka, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mr. George Galloway. Bless you. I have been following you, and this is a great opportunity to talk. I'm sure you might give me up to 3 minutes. By the way, I heard Hundeyin talk, the young man you interviewed, the journalist. You see, Mr. George, if you don't deal with the problem from the root, whatever you're doing wouldn't solve the problem. You're just cutting it by the side, maybe clipping the wings. The problem is from the amalgamation. An amalgamation was done without consultation. That is the problem. And that amalgamation, in fact, I was very happy when you were mentioning Nigeria as a country. You did not call it a nation, because I had heard you earlier say you don't support the dissolution or division of nations in Africa. Well, I was going to ask you to explain to me the difference between a nation, a country, and a state. But since you have mentioned Nigeria as a country, then I got pacified. Because as a nation, Nigeria has never been a nation. Before 1914, there was no nation as Nigeria. A country accepted on the grounds that Lugard imposed it on people that are living within the same area, but not that those people were consulted as a country. But as a nation, Nigeria never existed. It was a contraption by somebody who decided to fuse in different regions together for economic reasons. And then as a state, we see a situation where ordinarily power belongs to the people in a democracy. But in the chapter 2, second chapter of the Nigerian Constitution, you will see where the power belongs to the state. It is not the people. So the state, having so much power, they operate with impunity without responding to the people or, being accountable to the people. So the problem now is there was a contraption which was contrary to the plans of those that live within that region. And it was formed for economic purpose. And it has given room to 2 types of evils. Number one, that contraption brought about so much suspicion, disunity, hatred, because these people don't have anything in common as their value that could bring them together as one to live as a people. The North were not ready for that amalgamation. And the only reason why the British people could allow the North come in was on condition that the North were going to rule. I just want to play a short note of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, and that will be it. Then the second one is that Biafra was asking for a confederation whereby different component regions will develop at their own pace, having a weak center. But when they saw it wasn't going to happen, they began to ask for a referendum where we can build our own roads, have an effective policing system, democracy that has dividends, educational institutions that are functional, health facilities that are working. We didn't have such, and that's why the Biafrans were asking for a referendum. And now, at the backup.
Now, look, no, Emeka, you've had your 3 minutes. You've had your 3 minutes, so let me respond. I didn't describe Nigeria as a nation because there are several nations within the state that we know as Nigeria, which was indeed created by colonialism without consultation, just like all the other African states were created in that way. I fully acknowledge the difficulties that have endured for more than a century in your case from the demarcations that were made. What I said on Wednesday and what I say again now, I don't believe that any of the problems will be resolved by breaking up African countries even further than they are already broken up. On the contrary, the opposite should happen. That Africa should see itself in a pan-African context, and that the borders drawn, unnatural borders, as David just pointed out, the border between Nigeria and Niger isn't even demarcated, and the people are exactly the same on each side of a non-existent border. So let's not break African countries up even further. Let's, on the contrary, seek to unite them. Let's seek to confederate them. Let's seek to make a union, a real democratic union of them. That way, people can have devolved power in the way that Scotland does, Biafra can have, in the way that Wales has or Catalonia has. Stresses and strains of nationalism can be accommodated using the ball bearings of African unity. I'm convinced, as I'm convinced in the Arab question also, which was equally falsely divided by colonialism for its own selfish reasons and interests. The answer is not more Arab countries, neither is it more Arab countries. So when people ask me, as they frequently do, and as you implicitly have just done, to support the breakup of Nigeria or to support and recognize Somaliland as a breakaway from Somalia and so on, I'm sorry, have to decline. I cannot. It goes against my political ethic, which does not believe that separatism is the answer to any of the undoubted questions that we face. Enough from me. Let's speak to Madame Khalida in Ottawa on Pakistan. Khalida, go ahead. What would you like to say?
Yes. Yeah, I am following you since 2003 when I met you in University of Western Ontario on Palestinian peace. Now our hero, ImranKhan, the judge who put him in jail, left right after the same night for UK, getting training in Hull University College. Shame to Britain protecting Pakistani criminals, giving them scholarship, visas and political asylum. Shame for their so-called democracy. Army Chief and Chief Justice of Pakistan, puppets of USA and UK, both getting training from CIA to oppress Pakistani people. UK and USA, stop sponsoring our criminals and protecting crimes. The judges who put our hero in jail now in London enjoying his life. He sold his soul and he sold all Pakistan just to get Britain visa and political asylum. Shame on Britain, shame on USA. We are sick of being oppressed from centuries, and there is no wisdom that the people, they cheated America. So they said that Pakistani army and Pakistani political leaders cheated them 40 years, and they don't have a gut to tolerate an honest, wise person who was standing up for peace. His fault was, he said that we are not going to involve in any more wars. Absolutely not to drone attacks and used our soil for any other countries. That was his crime. And if he is a peacemaker, he should be out and freedom of speech must be there. Our girls, 15,000 people are in jail, poor worker, middle class worker, and West is silent. This is so double standard. Shame on the West, G7 countries. Shame on France that they are doing what they are doing to Algeria. Shame, shame. Kick out our criminals from your countries. They looted our money and they invested in UK. All know that. Blind-eyed, lip-tied, so-called stupid, cruel people on this earth have nothing to do.
Ameen, Pakistan Zindabad. Thank you, Khalida. Brilliant call. Email from Stephen regarding Rudy, the guy who loved Trudeau, remember. How could that caller praise Trudeau? I have only just recovered. I laughed at exactly the same time as you yourself did, George. Has the poor fellow been so stuffed with lies and propaganda? Kindest regards, Stephen Wilkinson. Well, it takes all sorts, Stephen. Here's a call from Larry in Spain on Africa. We are the global university of the airwaves. Go ahead, Larry.
Hello, George.
Welcome. Go ahead.
I wanted to talk about the situation in Niger. I believe the French should leave Africa alone to fend for itself, to solve our problems on our own. Their presence in Africa, I believe, is what is causing all the problems that we have in the continent. They have looted enough of our resources, and they should leave the continent alone. ECOWAS, that is preparing for potential war against Niger, against the junta in Niger, I believe is being controlled from the outside.
Yeah, for sure. Through Nigeria. Through Nigeria. I mean, they're going to get the mother of all wars if they're not careful, Larry. Algeria is an ally of Russia, and almost all, even Chad, that they expected to roll over when they demanded intervention, has declined to do so. So you're going to have the mother of all conflicts. There won't be any uranium getting mined and shipped, and there won't be any more gold either. And if Nigeria goes up in flames through being press ganged into this war, well, this becomes incalculable. So they really ought to stop this, Larry, before it goes any further. And we must hope that not all of our leaders are always utter idiots, lunatics. Email from Julian. George, your guests are spot on and on fire tonight. Best wishes to you and the production crew for bringing us this truth across the globe. Thank you all, Julian. Thank you, Julian. Comments on YouTube. There have been thousands of those tonight. Peter Nwawam says Tinubu is a bagman 100%. And Jack Klugman says Blinken visited Nigeria right before the election. And Kevwe Benabi says, say no to war. Nigerians are our brothers. We should support, not fight them. And Rejoice Megameri says, David is speaking nothing but the truth. Tinubu did not win. We did not vote for him. An email from Joan. George, thanks for your show. Just great. As for that imbecile, I don't know what planet he's living on. There's a poll done recently in Canada, and they found that Justin Trudeau was the worst prime minister in 50 years. And who was prime minister 50 years ago but his father, Pierre Trudeau. I say that in inverted commas. If you know, you know. As for the convoy, I'm glad you set that idiot straight. Well done, George, for defending our freedom convoy. Best wishes, Joan Novak, Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. Comments on the poll, which is closing in 2 minutes. 17,961 people have voted. Gwynedd says, I think the US would revolt if Trump was imprisoned on trumped-up charges. No pun intended. Clever Trevor says, if Trump wins the presidency from a prison cell, could he pardon himself? No power on earth would stop him doing so. Croquet says, I don't think he'll be convicted, but I think that Trump would run from prison. And King Alex says, if Donald Trump was president, Tinubu would never have become president. Terence is on the line in England, in Norwich, on Pakistan. Go ahead, Terence.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. Very nice to speak to you, and I hope you're keeping well. I was immensely impressed by Khalida, and she got a bit emotional there. And I'd just like to add to the fact that Balochistan is where Mr. Kaka has come from. He also trained himself in London.
The new caretaker, yeah. Yeah,
that's right. He's well known to American forces. He's well known to British forces because at the confluence of Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, he's been trained for this now, and he's a sleeper. He's quite simple. So when Khalida was saying what she was saying, I felt so empowered by that lady. And you know, ImranKhan is locked up for the truth. Assange is locked up for the truth. The truth, it seems now, is only in shows like this on certain aspects. And I disagree with you on quite a few things, Mr. Galloway. But on this, and on Pakistan, and on ImranKhan, you were spot on. And the more people know about that, the better. America and its satrap in Britain is up to the game again. The sleeper is now the leader. The druggie is in charge in Nigeria, another sleeper from Chicago. And it's wonderful to watch. But the people that suffer, it's not wonderful to watch.
Absolutely correct, Terence. Great call. Thanks for that. Daniel in Manchester in England is a Nigerian lawyer and has a point of view on Niger. Go ahead, Daniel. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Judge Galloway. How are you?
By the grace of God, good. Thanks for calling. Go ahead.
All right. So it's a shame, really, what's happening in West Africa. It seems to me like the West, which we call Britain and America, are trying to fight a proxy war, a war that cannot be fought in Europe. We all know. Yeah. Hello? Yeah, we all know that.
Yeah, go ahead, go on.
We all know that Europe cannot afford any war. The war will totally destroy Europe, and they will never recover from it. So, what's also shameful is that Nigerians came out full-fledged to vote in the last elections, and it's just been swept under the rug again. Everyone's, hopes have been dashed. And we all know this president bought it's all allegations. I don't want to be too conclusive, but Nigerians are very saddened by the sort of president that has emerged right now. And we all think he's doing the bidding for people who want Africa to always remain in the dark. Because once Africa is in the dark, then that profits, a lot of Western countries. So I think, George, don't turn out the torch on Africa, especially West Africa and especially Nigeria. I think if people keep coming out to condemn the sort of government we have in Nigeria, sooner or later, more people will join in that positive struggle. And I think we should, more of us should come out and condemn the sort of president that we have, who's had plethora cases in America, for money laundering and things like that. I mean, you don't have to be convicted. Britain is rule on promise. Once you have a parliamentarian who's in any sort of dirty dealing, the ideal thing for them to do is to resign. They don't continue in that office so as not to put shame on the parliament. So I don't see why we should have this sort of people coming out to run for president and a lot of idiots supporting him, and putting him on the seat in Astor Rock. It's a shame. I hope Africa will wake up, and I hope that could succeed because it's for a good cause. And I hope there's no war in West Africa. That's all I have to say. And thank you very much.
Well, what you said was extraordinarily powerful, and I'm grateful to you for it. A question from Dave on email. I'm very curious to hear your view on Victoria Nuland. I personally believe she's one of the most dangerous people on the planet right now. Keep up the fantastic work. God bless you and your family. Thank you, Dave. If I can put it no higher or lower than this, that Victoria Nuland is proof positive that Satan is present in the world. Final call, I suspect, from Chidi in South Carolina, but on Niger. Go ahead, Chidi.
Yeah, hi, George. My name is Chidi, and I'm calling from South Carolina. Thank you so much for putting me on. I just want to talk briefly on. So thank you so much for your mother of all talk shows. I've listened to it over 3 years. Very, very incisive and educative. I want to just make this contribution towards Nigeria and at large, West Africa, what is going on. I will start with, I know you're not a proponent for breaking up of countries, and you've explained why, and I quite understand. But the problem in Africa is that we have to go back to how these countries were formed and created. Different tribes are put together without consulting them. And along the line, in several of these countries, the tribal lines have been used to cause civil wars that have deep-seated, animosity and bitterness. For instance, something like Nigeria. You know, the politics was played and triggered a war that ended up in genocide against the Igbo people for about almost 3.5 million of us. Now we pretend that we've healed and we've moved on from it, which is not the case. So we have just a nation where there is no commitment. People are not nationalists. We pander to our tribes. And that is why you can never get the youth to come out and protest. Once you introduce tribal leanings, everything collapses. So now people because there is something looming like this, like a civil war and regional war, everybody is waking up. But after this, we go back to sleep. The whole region is poor. We are the most endowed with resources, but all our youth keep traveling. We are all desperate. We leave and we never want to go back because we just are not nationalists. You understand? So we have the ideas. We have the judicial. Why is it that the speaker, David, he talked about the judiciary? Why is it that those judges do not have a conscience? Because they're not thinking of the country. It's all about tribe. And I'm starting to say it seems that people of my kind from that part of the world. You see, tribalism, it's so strong in us that we just can't get past it. So that's why I'm for...
Well, we have to try, look, Chidi, we'll have to try and get past it. Because if we begin a process where every tribe in Africa has a country, a state, a separate state, with borders and armies and foreign embassies to manipulate them. This will be a disaster for Africa. That's all I'm saying. I don't dispute the point. I'm not qualified to dispute the points that you are making about tribalism, the Igbo people, and I'm not an expert on that. What I am an expert on is this. That unity is strength, that division is weakness, that united we stand, divided we fall are tried and trusted principles of mine. Because of my trade union background, because of my political ideology, I believe in these things. It doesn't mean that if we're united, there will be no longer any problems. It doesn't mean that if we are united that we will always behave fairly, but it means if we descend into a vortex of tribal division, of breaking up one African country after another based on tribalism, every problem we do have will be much worse, and many new problems will proliferate. And I promise you this, because I am an expert on this, the French would love it. The British would love it. The Americans would love it. Imperialism would love it. If it could get to work on 500 new countries, turning them one against the other, deepening the divisions that undoubtedly exist between them, that would be heaven for them. It would be a kind of bonanza for them. They'd never be done exploiting you still further. What I am an expert on, Chidi, is this. Only if the African people can come together, starting now in West Africa, and tell, in this case, the colonial power France, to get the hell out, to keep your paltry development aid, to forget about the idea that you can power yourself at our expense while we live in darkness and penury. You live as a superpower, as a nuclear-armed superpower with veto, vote, and power in the United Nations. While we remain poor, you are rich. Forget about that. If the African people of West Africa can come together and at least say that, you will have struck a blow for all of the people of all of the tribes of West Africa. Think about that. Because the real division in the world, I promise you, it's not between the Igbos and others in Nigeria. The real division in the world is between the haves and the have-nots. The haves and their have-yachts. The real division in the world is between the countries that are quaffing champagne while people in West Africa don't even have clean water. As Thomas Sankara pointed out, we can choose between champagne for some or clean water for everyone. That's the real division in this world. I'm not making light of the feeling, I called it national, you call it tribal, of the people, the Igbo people, of the Biafran people or other. I'm not making light of that. I know that some people, not I, some people feel these identities keenly. I do not. I know as a Scotsman that the English are not my enemy. And I know that by becoming an independent state of Scotland, our problems will not be resolved. New problems will emerge and old problems will be exacerbated, intensified, multiplied. That's why I'm against nationalism, or as you put it, tribalism. I'm against it because no problem will be resolved by it, but new problems will be multiplied as a result of it. I have gone on too long. 17,961 people voted. And they voted that Donald Trump will fight the next election 38, 43, 33, 35 from a prison cell. But a clear majority thought that he will fight the election, but it won't be from a prison cell. 62, 57, 67, 65. Thank you for all of those who voted. Thank you all of those who called the show but didn't get through. Thank you all of those who watched the show live. And I merely ask you to make it spread, proliferate. Tell as many people as possible about what you saw and heard here this evening on the mother of all talk shows. Encouraging them to catch up on the live stream and on the clips that will follow. Thank you very much indeed for being with me this evening.